Hello and a very warm welcome. You're watching The Wire. From today onwards, we're starting a new show here on The Wire. It's called The Wire Wrap, where we will be discussing the top developments that have happened over the week just ahead of the Lok Sabha elections. Today, joining me is Yamini Aiyar, Director at the Center for Policy Research and Political Editor at The Wire, Ajoy Ashirwad. First off, let's start off with the big news that's coming in, which is the electoral bonds. The Supreme Court has held that the electoral bond scheme is unconstitutional and has asked banks to stop issuing such electoral bonds. And this is a big judgment that is coming just ahead of the Lok Sabha elections. Ajoy, how do you see this and what are the implications going to be going into the elections?
No, I think kind of the Supreme Court, it's a very progressive judgment. It is called it unconstitutional, and over the years, ever since it's been in existence since 2018, we've been kind of saying that the way of electoral bonds is amounts to nothing but legalizing bribes. It was all while the government at that point of time, Arun Jaitley argued that it would stop black money into political parties, but and at the same time he also said that we cannot he introduced the confidentiality clause because he said that it would kind of again make donors get into cash donations, but which has not what has eventually happened is the maximum, almost more than 70% every year, the electoral bonds, the donations have gone to the BJP, which is the ruling party right now, and only the ruling party has the wherewithal to kind of identify the donors, while if the opposition party gets those donations, they have no kind of means to know who the donors are. So it was nothing but legalizing bribes, and the whole idea that it would stop black money, the flow of black money into political parties has not worked at all. We all know that most electoral bonds are just one way to donate to political parties, and there were already electoral trusts which were much more transparent, and here the government introduced electoral bonds, amended Company Act, and that is why Supreme Court, I feel, is very right in calling it unconstitutional, and also significantly saying that it is one way to kind of for the donors to enter into a quid pro quo arrangement with the government. So yeah, it is unconstitutional. We have always been contending that, and today Supreme Court has also kind of agreed with it.
Yamini, you want to weigh in on this? This is a big order coming in from the Supreme Court, especially the court has now held that the issue of electoral bonds anonymously goes against right to information. This is something that the center has also gone against earlier. So this is a big judgment coming from the Supreme Court. And in terms of political funding, just ahead of Lok Sabha elections, how do you see this playing out?
No, absolutely. I think, as Ajoy said, it's a very it's a February surprise. Actually, it's a good step forward, both for the fact that the Supreme Court said that this is unconstitutional, and that it also simultaneously upheld the right to information. So Ajoy talked about the opacity when it comes to other political parties. The real problem, in my view, was the lack of transparency and increased opacity when it came to understanding the dynamics of political funding for the citizen and the voter. So the fact that the citizens' right to information has been upheld is, I think, a huge victory for democracy, particularly against a backdrop of systematic undermining of the right to information. The fact that the court has recognized it is important. I think that there is also two other important elements here. There has been, as we've seen over the last decade, more or less, and more pronounced, I think, in the last 5 years of this government, a kind of jugalbandi that's been going on between the courts and the government. And in the process of this jugalbandi, more times than not, the court has appeared to be extremely compromised in ways that have essentially made us question the checks and balances that are put into place within a democratic context, where the judiciary plays a very important role in upholding the rule of law. The fact that the judiciary has taken this view, the Supreme Court has taken this view on the electoral bonds is a very important reminder that fingers crossed, some elements of democracy work on occasion. And hopefully it'll also be a reminder to the government that blatant authoritarianism is going to be questioned. But let's remember that this has come after the electoral bonds, if I'm not wrong, were initiated in the 2017 budget. We are now talking in 2024, just ahead of an elections. Long years have passed. Large amounts of money have been transferred in a non-transparent manner, undermining the basic fabric of democracy. Don't forget, political financing is core to the structure of democracy. And this long wait has hugely compromised democracy. So while we celebrate the Supreme Court's judgment today, we must also remember that it has come too late. And in the interim, a lot of core elements of the fabric of our democracy have been undermined. If I'm not wrong, we are talking literally minutes after the judgment. So with the caveat that we haven't yet gone into the details of the judgment, I understand that the court has essentially required that monies that have been received in the last 15 days have to be given back. That's a good thing. It may ensure at least that in the run-up to the elections, I won't say transparency because political financing has never been transparent, but at least the increased opacity by virtue of the electoral bonds will stop. But, political parties don't accrue funding 1 month before the campaign. This is a long process. So I think it's more a long-term corrective than a corrective that is going to rebalance financing structures for all political parties as they enter the electoral fray for 2024.
That's a very important point you're raising, that there's a corrective measure. Perhaps we are not going to see the implications in the coming elections, but going forward. And if we speak about the financing and economy a little bit, if we go back to what's happened over the course of the last week, the most important development was, of course, the end of the 17th Lok Sabha. We're going into elections in a couple of months. And at the end of the absolute fag end of the interim budget session, the government came up with the white paper on the Indian economy. Now, it is known by now to everyone and our viewers as well that this white paper was on the 10 years of the UPA government, even though the Modi government has been in power for the past 10 years. And of course, the Congress, in a sense, has managed to preempt and came out with their own black paper just before that. I just want to quote the centre's white paper a little bit over here, and where it has said that now that we have stabilized the economy and set it on a recovery and growth path, it is necessary to place in the public domain the seemingly unsurmountable challenges left behind as a legacy of the UPA government. So, Yamini, how do you see these two documents on the Indian economy, and what really is the state of the Indian economy? We compare these two documents, it's completely different picture. So what really is going on?
So look, first things first, this is just, in my opinion, petty. I mean, whether it makes for good politics or not is a separate issue, but it's petty. It's petty because regardless of what we may, of the conditions of the economy as of today, the fact of the matter is that the UPA was voted out of power 10 years ago. The Indian voter chose to bring in a new government precisely because it recognized that there were many elements of the performance of the past that it did not appreciate. So what is the need to try and once again place your assessment, push the voter to assess yourself 10 years down the line on the back of a past that the voter has anyway rejected? So, thinking it just assumes that the voter is ignorant, and it plays into a very petty understanding of politics and frankly of policy. Policy, as students of public policy are well aware, outside of the blare of narrative that is politics, has always been a long-term incremental process that builds up over time. And there is absolutely no question that whatever progress, to the extent that progress has been made, or you could argue that some progress has been made on the back of building blocks that have been built over a period of time. No government of any hue and any capability can suddenly turn up and build. You don't institutionalize policy from a vacuum. So there is a process of build up, and we know that many of the things that the NDA today tom-toms as its great success stories, whether it is its welfare programs on the back of Aadhaar, the GST, are all frankly processes that were long in the making and went through a gestation period. And sure, there was momentum that was built up over this 10-year period to get to where we are, but the foundation was laid, the so-called Aadhaar was laid well in advance. Now, when it comes to the bigger question that you are asking, sorry, just one more point on politics. It is a job of the opposition to function as the equivalent of a shadow cabinet to the government in power. The fact that the opposition produces a black paper, it shouldn't have called it, I think, a black paper, that too is a little petty, but nonetheless, the fact that the opposition presents its own assessment of the government is par for the cause in parliamentary democracy. My argument with the opposition would be, why did you wait till now? You've had 5 years to produce these papers on a routine basis. That is your job. You should have done it better. But the opposition's paper is less interesting to me than it is the government's choice at the end of a 10-year period, where in the blare of narrative, it says that it has made massive strides forward, placing the Indian economy on the highway of the 21st century, that it needs to now measure itself back with the performance of a government that the voter has rejected 10 years ago. To the question of the economy itself, a colleague of mine pressed Ctrl-Alt-Delete to the word employment and found that it gets almost no reference. And I think that's the heart of the challenge of the Indian economy today. We have since 1991 been on a path of economic growth where our structural transformation has skipped low-scale manufacturing. It has always suffered from, skipped low-scale manufacturing and gone straight into high-end services as a primary engine of growth. We have always struggled with this question of jobless growth. The question of jobless growth is today very acute. It is very acute partially on account of policy missteps. One of the first 101s of policy is do no harm. In this instance, there have also been policy missteps that have added to the problem, demonetization being an important one, and the inability of the government, in my view, as it goes to face the voter, to admit that this is a serious problem and to offer its own perspective on what it has done, because it has done some things to address this problem, means that it is kind of trying to overlook the most fundamental issue that impacts the lives, everyday lives of our voters: employment and wages. Two huge missing elements, which tells us a lot about the lack of health of the Indian economy. And just a last point on this, I think it's important to recognize that any claims to be made on the Indian economy today are being made on the back of a data vacuum. We do not have a census. We do not have a consumption expenditure survey. These are huge, if I may say so, black marks on the performance of this government, that we are judging the performance of the government based on my impressions and yours, my experiences and yours, my biases and yours. We still don't have good evidence.
As Yamini is pointing out, and this is something that Asaduddin Owaisi, the MIM MP, also raised in Parliament, that there have been no surveys. So what is the basis that the government is providing these figures in its white paper, saying that we have increased, growth has increased as compared to the UPA regime, GDP growth has increased and everything. So if in the absence of data, how must one see this? Because employment, as we are going into elections, as we know, it's a huge issue. If we go to the...
For which we do have data, just to say, we have the periodic labor force survey data.
Yeah, so in the absence of data, how must one then judge these figures that are being put out by the government?
So some of which the government claims is backed by the government's own data, which have of course been questioned. For example, the Prime Minister just quoted that 25 crore population have been elevated out of the poverty line, which we had a piece in the Wire by economist Santosh Mehrotra, which said that it was absolutely bunkum and it's actually a rigged process. That whole data itself is being questioned right now, and we have had so many experiences where the government kind of made suitable changes to kind of show itself in a good light. But I look at the whole kind of black paper, white paper as in terms of political optics. So this was one of the few rare instances where the opposition kind of preempted the government and kind of was prompt enough to kind of challenge the whole narrative that Prime Minister kind of in his speech in the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha kind of talked about how he emphasized on the idea of raftar, the speed with which he has kind of steered the India story over the last 10 years. So and gave figures in his speeches. So this was one of the few occasions where we know the Congress and the other opposition parties for its kind of beleaguered, delayed and some delayed responses, and this was one of the times when it kind of was very prompt. and which was kind of uh, s- welcoming to see, because it actually challenged the government on the basis, and in a way kind of diffuse the government's narrative, which was always kind of through the prime minister's speeches. They were kind of projecting the India's growth story as something really big, which has actually not happening on the ground. We have had demonetization, and where over 4 lakh factories were shut and people lost their jobs. So while at one stage, at one level, the government talks about formalizing the economy, but it has no evidence for kind of increasing the employment, or kind of getting people jobs. So what she was also talking about, jobless growth. So all these kind of issues are there on the ground. As a political reporter myself, whenever I go and cover elections, I see unemployment as the single biggest political issue, which the opposition, I feel, has not been able to kind of pick and take like really, really seriously, and challenge the government on those terms. So economy is something where the prime minister and the BJP government at the center are always on a weak wicket, and this is where the opposition has not been able to kind of nail them properly, and they've been doing various things, but not on the economy front. So as in 20 before 2024 elections, I hope that there is some serious talk in the political campaigns of both BJP and the Congress on the economy front, so that people get some of the answers that they kind of look forward to from the government and from the opposition. For example, in the recent assembly elections, we constantly heard on the ground about paper leaks, about vacancies not being filled. All of these are symptoms about huge rate of unemployment everywhere, and people feel that kind of pinch on the ground. Many people who are employed, who were employed, are unemployed now. People who are eligible for jobs are not given enough vacancies, and even in the private sector, when the private sector is also not doing well, so then there's a kind of like a environment of anguish, misery across, and the people don't have enough kind of money to spend on their own well-being or anything. We all of us know this. Anyone who goes to the ground, it's for everyone to see. But when the prime minister claims such big things about the Indian economy, it comes across as something very different from what is in the ground. So these are the things I think we need to talk about as we head towards the 2024
So
election.
just on that, I think
Hmm.
if one were to take a sort of longer view, I think there are some big bets have been made in and frankly, that is the basis on which an evaluation should take place, right? Certainly, a bet has been made that in enhanced public expenditure in capital expenditure can help kickstart and crowd in increased private investment. And to a degree, we have seen that, and that enhanced capital expenditure, there's been degrees of expenditure switching, etc., etc. But nonetheless, there has been, you could say with complete confidence that the big bet has been made on focusing public investment very much through via capital expenditure. Big infrastructure projects have been a flagship of how the political projection has been made. Has this helped kick start and enhance private investment? The answer is not really. There are also attempts at thinking through sort of the 21st century version of the economy. Most countries across the world are increasingly going back to sort of what had at one point been set aside, the world of industrial policy. There's been a sort of backdoor entry into that in India in the context of these product-linked incentives as these big subsidies to encourage new kinds of manufacturing. You've also seen, for example, big bets being taken on things like Apple coming into India, particularly around Tamil Nadu, to manufacture. To what extent is this going to, in a forward-looking story, put us onto the highway of contributing to the value chain at the upper end, but also address the longer-term challenge of jobs? It's perhaps a little early to make that assessment, but it's not clear that things are moving necessarily, given the pace at which we need to be generating creating jobs. The big challenge of manufacturing, particularly in northern parts and eastern parts, the poorer parts of India, remains and that is a structural issue. How do you address the deep structural constraints that are ensuring that growth areas which were productive in India continue to be productive, and areas which have been stuck in a low income trap, not even a middle income trap, exit out of that trap? We haven't made much progress, and you can see that that's where that whole north-south divide story has come in a big way. When it comes to, relatedly, when it comes to the question, therefore, of mass employment, we have absolutely no answer on the table. Neither does the BJP, frankly, nor do most opposition parties. They raise the issue, Congress raises this issue, but what is their imagination of jobs beyond reservations and government jobs? It's not clear at all. There is the other big bet that has been made on the sort of for the masses, so to speak, using the Aadhaar-enabled digital technology structure, a sort of expanded welfare. To be clear, that expanded welfare has come not through a massive increase in welfare expenditure, even during COVID. It has come largely from expenditure switching, but perhaps there is certainly a greater visibility and push to certain schemes, and the expectation is in some ways that there are these two kind of ends to the economy: the top end of the economy and the bottom end of the economy. And the bottom end of the economy can be dealt with through these welfare kind of continued, at least political narrative around expansion of welfare schemes. And then there are these big bets that are being made on the top. But none of these have necessarily addressed the core challenge of the Indian economy, which in my opinion is employment and wages. And when the bulk of your economy, which operates in the informal economy, for which we don't have good data, but we do know that these are the two most critical issues, is in pain, then depending on where you sit, but where I sit, those are very serious flaws in, and I would not assess this as a particularly successful way of, as a particularly successful report card when it comes to the economy. These are the crucial things. An economy is meant to improve the lives of everybody, not the lives of some. And inequality in India is reaching a point where we are going to be in, and you can see it, the whole north-south question, it is at the heart of it, it's a question of inequality.
Right. As you're mentioning earlier, also you mentioned along with employment, demonetization was completely missing from the entire white paper, which had such a huge effect on the poor people of this country. And if you do a search on that document, it's not there at all. And The Wire has also done a story on this. I would urge our viewers to read it. But also these issues that you were mentioning, Ajoy, that the government, that the opposition is trying to raise issues of unemployment. But as Yamini is also mentioning, what is their coherent plan? Nobody knows. They have not articulated it. Yes, they have managed to preempt the government in a sense by putting the conversation about economy in the forefront in the past week by bringing out the black paper. But is it going to resonate in the coming elections? Because as we are seeing in the assembly elections, when we went to the ground, we saw that jobs were such a big issue, and especially places like Madhya Pradesh where the youth were really disenchanted, but the government came back to power. So do you see it resonating? Do you see these economic issues resonating in the coming elections?
These issues are there, of course. It's been there for the last 10 years now. And ever since demonetization happened, these issues have actually escalated on the ground. But there have been like really poor kind of mobilization, political mobilization from the opposition parties. Their regional parties have, of course, done better than the national parties. But if we talk about Congress, for example, even whatever issue it picks up, even like if you're talking about caste census also, where Rahul Gandhi and other leaders kind of supported the move, but even in those assembly elections where they were kind of going in for a win, and did not eventually, the people were not talking about it. So it depends on how these opposition political parties kind of mobilize on the ground, create a narrative which resonate with these people, which kind of, you can't talk about something which people don't resonate with. So it's important for these parties to kind of talk about these issues in kind of in terms of kind of in a language that they understand. They kind of figure out that these people, and they have to be around the main what the Congress and other political parties which have lost to the BJP in recent times. I feel that what they have lost is of course they don't have a level playing field, but the basic minimum political work to reach people, to create leaders on the ground, that's been missing. So they have to kind of do those things. But there have been autonomous movements, like look at the farmers movements right now. It's not supported by one or other political party, but these are all the students movements across the country, where they've been talking about these issues, even if so I think the opposition parties need to kind of pick on these people's issues. Most of the universities have been protesting against these kind of problems in India, about unemployment, about arbitrary admission processes, about universities kind of taking a very different character now. The farmers are talking about an MSP law. Why can't the opposition take these issues more forcefully? And we have data about this. She was talking about inequality. Why is the farmers protest always kind of showing its force all the time? Because the rural wages, if factored in with inflation, have actually declined over the years. So there is a lot of and that is why you need MSP. And MSP, as the government claims, can kind of cost a huge deal to the exchequer. It's not, because MSP, the farmers want an MSP only if there is a surplus and the market prices crash. So they want some kind of assurance from the government that, okay, you can buy certain things on MSP. So they don't need the MSP they need MSP as a guarantee for their kind of crop, not for increased wages, because they would like to sell their crop even at a better price than the MSP. But this is like the minimum that they are asking for, and the government had promised it. They formed a committee. They had 37 meetings, but they could not come up with any kind of idea or a coherent plan. So these are issues which the people have been now autonomously taking up, coming out on the streets. We need the political parties to also come out on streets and talk about these issues. Only then there will be a counter narrative to the whole government narrative, and that will be true democracy at play, according to me. Yeah.
Since you're talking about the farmers' protest, that is also the other big story that is developing at the moment. It's been on for the past few days. And just to give our viewers a sense of what is happening, the Delhi Chalo call was given by farmer unions, and the protest has started. We have seen that the state has clamped down on these protesters. There have been use of tear gas shells, there have been water cannons that have been used, and the protesters have not backed down. Of course, talks are going on between central ministers and the farmer unions, but they have remained inconclusive as of now. And what the farmers are really asking for, as Ajoy was also mentioning right now, is a central guarantee for MSP, farm loan waivers, and the withdrawal of cases that were stamped on these farmers when they had protested in 2020 to 2021 against the 3 farm laws, which eventually were rolled back. So we speak about, as Ajoy was mentioning, Yamini, about the central law on MSP, which is really the bone of contention in these farmers' protests. So the government is saying that it's not feasible at this point. They're saying that we need to look at the pros and the cons. The opposition, of course, is saying that if we have voted the power, then we will bring a central law on MSP. But getting to the politics in just a moment, how feasible is a central law on MSP?
So just let's step back on a couple of things here. I think first and foremost, the politics is at the center of it. And the reason the politics is at the center of it is because any kind of structural changes that need to be made within agriculture markets. I mean, it's not anybody's case that agricultural productivity is healthy in India. It has been an urgent need for reform. In fact, we are one of the few countries which is desperately trying to get people out of agriculture as part of our structural transformation imagination. We don't really have a strategy, our imagination, without actually enhancing agricultural productivity. So there's lots of agriculture markets have been crying for reform. That's not something that we should take away. But in order to be able to reform markets, you need to be able to have dialogue and deliberation and bring in the voices of all those who are affected by it. Let us also not forget that agriculture is a state subject. So the role of the center is a bit more complicated in this whole thing. Consistently over the since the 2020 parliamentary passage of these laws, the entire process has been managed precisely going against this particular tenet of urgency of dialogue, deliberation, and negotiation. You can't reform without these three things. You also can't reform without these three things against a backdrop of a context where, as Ajoy pointed out, you have had a stagnation of wages. In fact, the whole claim of doubling farmers' income has remained just a claim, and so much so that now, in fact, I think it's even been dropped. As you said, even the white paper didn't really address this, and there were, for a host of reasons, there was a period when wages were growing in the late 2000s, late 2000s to early 2010. Since then, a combination of global and domestic factors have caused wages to stagnate, and that's been a very, very serious issue. So it's against this economic and backdrop that the politics of negotiation has become central, that the farmers have been taking to the streets even before these protests post the farm laws. We saw, if you recall, in 2017, farmers protesting. Agriculture has been in distress for quite some time, and it is important to recognize that, because the nature of the demand and the claims that are being made by farmers are coming against this backdrop of deep distress. In all these conversations about what is fiscally viable or not viable, it is important to recognize this simple fact. On the question of viability, there are no doubt constraints that need to be considered. To my mind, not so much the fiscal constraint as much as the centrality and urgency of needing to move towards diversification of crops. And that is a necessary condition on account of both changing dietary patterns, the nutrition challenge that India confronts, the climate challenge that India confronts. There was a context in which our food security required wheat and rice, the Green Revolution context. That context has now shifted. And in fact, tools like MSP can be very effectively used to be able to initiate this very critical transition. So, to my mind, this is the nub of the conversation that we need to be having. But all this larger context of agricultural distress and inability to negotiate and dialogue has created a political noise that makes it impossible to actually have this conversation. Farmers asking for guarantee of an MSP law in and of itself, to me, is somewhat of a problem. This is a state subject. What is the role of the center here? We have very good examples of state governments having done decentralized procurement and actually using the MSP as a tool to encourage diversification. To my mind, that should be the pathway going forward. However, the terms of the conversation are not that. The terms of the conversation now have been reduced to guarantee law or no guarantee law. And from a farmer's point of view, they understand the political economy of this. The fiscal question is actually just a distraction. The political economy of this is, from the farmer's point of view, they have consistently been confronting an extremely, agriculture in any case is the kind of a sector of the economy that requires risk protection of various kinds. They have over the last decade been in an extremely vulnerable situation. Wages have stagnated, incomes have stagnated, claims of double your income have not gone very far. All that they have got in real practical terms is PM Kisan, which is not addressing these very structural constraints. And if you look back into the history of what has this country actually demonstrated to farmers as the one thing it has done, actually, it has been the MSP guarantee for wheat and rice. So in a way, they are asking for things within that framework. What happened to all the other aspects of what we needed to do to strengthen agricultural productivity, from agricultural research to supporting inputs, input subsidies in different ways? We have not done much there. And so from the farmers' point of view, they are going to ask for the only thing that they think that the government has actually delivered on, and they're going to double down and push that. And if you want to find a via media out, then there has to be trust building between government and farmers. And there has to be, most crucially, away from the blare of politics, a really serious rethink about the structural challenge that the Indian economy confronts. The question of unemployment is not unique to today. It might be more exacerbated today because the inequality has grown and the formal economy is looking a little bit stronger today than it perhaps has if you'd say 2019, we had a fairly significant slowdown in the run-up to COVID as well, if you recall. But the informal economy and agricultural economy is not looking very robust. So this is precisely why we need to address this problem. This is a consequence of a long-term structural stagnation of the Indian economy. How do you think of growth in a way that is growth that takes along everybody, that creates employment opportunities for the bulk of the country, rather than just taking along that very thin sliver of all three of us who are sitting over here?
This very important point you're raising about the trust building, which is in a sense that the heart of this protest, which is coming in less than 2 years. Farmers were protesting for over a year, between 2020 to 2021. They were told that our demands will be fulfilled. The farm laws were rolled back, but now they're saying that nothing has been done. Our demands were not fulfilled. We tried to speak to the government several times before the protest started, but nothing came, and therefore we have started protesting again. So how do you see this playing out? Is this going to be a serious challenge for the BJP just ahead of elections? Thousands of farmers hitting the roads. It's bad optics for sure, but is it going to hurt the BJP's chances going ahead?
That it remains to be seen how BJP. I don't think, but what has currently happened is, according to me, the government was, of course, trying to build a political narrative, an electoral narrative around Ram Janmabhoomi and Ram Aa Gaye Hain and all that. What farmers have done, they've brought the whole kind of narrative back to real issues like agrarian distress, and the way they are being demonized is by the media, which is seen as pliant and has been peddling the government's narrative, mostly the mainstream media. Makes me feel that the government may be a bit nervous, because it has definitely, what the farmers' protest has done has derailed the way the BJP thought will get into this whole election mode. So it has, of course, and that is why we see such heavy barricading. We see drones throwing tear gas, those drones which the government commissioned to kind of have better scientific farming done. Those same drones are being used for kind of punitive action against protests, and we all know that how protesters have been dealt with in this government every other space. So even in the last round of farmers protest in February in 2020-21, the most of the maximum part of the farmers' 1 year long protest had been very, very peaceful, and even then they were demonized as Khalistanis. They were demonized and called many names, and that is what there has been no effort by the government to build that kind of trust with farmers and address their real problems. And it eventually, the Prime Minister had to roll back the farm laws, and with a promise that they will look into all these kind of other issues that remains to be seen. Yeah, but Punjab election, I don't see it as just an electoral move, but it was the whole kind of mobilization by farmers and the determination with which they stayed on to carry on a kind of 1 year long protest, which is very, very unusual, and in fact unprecedented to have such a wide farmers protest in the borders of Delhi. So it had like that kind of pressure factor on the government, so it had to roll back, and there must be some other factors also, but farmers has to be given farmers have to be given that kind of credit for protesting in such a large scale, and they're back now, just 2 months ahead, or even 100 days ahead of the Lok Sabha election. So for BJP it's really bad optics, but what the farmers have done, they have again kind of brought back the election and given some kind of and will force the government to kind of talk about these kind of issues, about issues around economy, issues about the agrarian distress, issues about their failed promises on these fronts, and it will kind of trigger, I feel, talks about other similar material issues that are being kind of ignored in this whole Ram Janmabhoomi kind of political campaign.
So maybe one way to think about this is that in a way, this is all very good for democracy. We started this conversation with the electoral bonds and the Supreme Court. We're talking now about the power of people that potentially can at least bring back. I mean, a week is a year in politics, and 3 months before an election or 2 months before an election might well be a lifetime. So lots of things can change. But the fact of the matter is that no matter how strong, no matter how dominant a political party is, no matter how effective and systematic it is in its use of the legitimate tools of monopoly of violence which it controls to coerce different arms of the state, to coerce people, there is still power that resides both in institutions as well as in people that pushes back and can shift the narrative. And I think that in a strange way, the images of the barricading of the borders of the city that we've been seeing through the course of the last 2 days, both is a reminder of how in a sense of how authoritarian regimes can be, but also how powerful people can be. And regardless of where you sit on the policy spectrum of MSP guarantee law and fiscal prudence, and what we need to do to actually reform agricultural markets and address the challenge of agricultural distress, it is these two images, I think, that are the most powerful, and it's in that the economic message is actually in that political message. And one that we shouldn't forget.
Yeah, as we're talking about the narrative building ahead of elections, of course, the farmers' protest is going to dominate headlines going forward into the coming week. But what's also happened in the previous week, if we look at the narrative of the BJP especially, is that the Uttarakhand government has come out with the Uniform Civil Code, becoming the first state in the country to come up with such a law, with a Uniform Civil Code, which will have the same law for all matters relating to marriage, divorce, inheritance, and of course, the very controversial live-in relationship clause, which has been spoken about a lot in the last week. But if we speak about the core issue of the UCC, it has been a long-standing demand of the BJP. It has been promising it in its election manifestos right from the 1990s, and now we are seeing it take a concrete form with the Uttarakhand government bring it out, becoming the first state. The other states, other BJP-ruled states, have also promised to follow suit. But if we look at the UCC, it has of course been criticized for being bad in law, but if we are not getting into the legal aspects of it and just looking at it politically, how do you see this, Yamini? Should it be seen in the interest of equality and gender justice, which is how the BJP has pitched it, that this is why we are doing it? Or should it be seen in the light of the critics? What they're pointing out is that it's targeting minorities.
So ideally, any conversation about the UCC should be seen within the framework of these critical questions of gender justice and equality. And I think that any attempt at creating a UCC has to first build that trust. So I think the fine, I don't want to comment on the finer elements of the UCC. I'm not a legal specialist, but I do believe that, but I do feel that this is a very, very serious concern. And for a UCC to effectively, in a secular country, a discourse on UCC has to be had on grounds of equality and equity, and cannot be a UCC conversation that is biased against any one particular religion. If there's even a hint of that, then we are in very dangerous territory. But let me say something else. I think if you look back at the evolution of Hindutva as a political force, especially from the 1980s onwards to today, there were three core mobilizational elements of that: Ram Mandir, 370, Article 370 in Kashmir, and the UCC. And since 2019, this government has effectively delivered on its promise of these two. Okay, now the argument of whether this is right or wrong is perhaps for another day. But let's look at these two. It has always had a difficult relationship with UCC for various reasons that are too complicated to discuss over here. And in some senses, this is its attempt as going into an election to say to its core votaries that we've not forgotten that we are trying to find other ways to do it. And actually, I think it also should be that there is something here to think about from a political strategy point of view for political parties who are positioning themselves as on the other side of the political divide. That if the core elements of what the Hindutva movement's ideological framework is, have essentially articulated themselves into these three key mobilizational tools, all of which are now sort of quote unquote delivering. if you are a political party that is positioning yourself as constitutionalist, as secular, what are the three core agenda items? And that, I think, is what is missing, because ultimately, to me, in the way I understand and read this, I see the real battleground, not the Indian economy, not the welfare, etc. All of which, those are pieces of the puzzle, but that's not the core battleground. The core battleground is the ideological debate, and it is the sort of constitutionalism versus Hindutva plus constitutionalism, or Hindutva plus nationalism, and what that sort of complicated mix produces. If you are going to challenge the BJP, then you have to say, what exactly is it that you are, as a constitutionalist, as a political party that mobilizes around the core values of the Constitution, what are the three core things that you are going to do? And that's the missing piece in this whole discourse.
If we speak about, of course, the opposition's charge, the whole narrative around this, the opposition has been completely missing in a sense. They have not been able to articulate what their position is, as she was also mentioning right now. But the central charge in the UCC, which other opposition parties, critics, women's groups, etc., have been raising, is that it's in a sense an attack on Islamic personal laws. Of course, the UCC in Uttarakhand leaves out the tribals but does not leave out the minorities. So even the Uttarakhand Mahila Morcha has questioned this, that the UCC in Uttarakhand has been silent on the Hindu undivided family but has disproportionately attacked Islamic laws. So how do you see this? Does this raise questions of whether the UCC is part of the larger project of the Hindu Rashtra, which, as she was mentioning, is now slowly being delivered? Amit Shah has also mentioned in Parliament that whatever we promised, we have delivered, which they have. So how do you see this playing out? Is this targeting a particular minority in the form of the UCC?
Yeah, so as Yamini was talking about, the history of Hindutva's mobilization was centered around three of those promises. 370 and Ram Janmabhoomi, they have already delivered on that. So what remains is UCC, and at the cusp of the 2024 elections, and the BJP has always kind of used these three core agendas to consolidate its own core base of Hindutva supporters. So when say the Uttarakhand government brought out this draft of UCC, whatever its merits or demerits may be. So it fulfills a kind of political goal for them also at the cusp of 2024 election. It serves also as an energizing kind of instrument for their core voters to kind of campaign harder, and kind of holds out that promise. Okay, two of the promises have already been fulfilled. The third term will, this is also Modi's key guarantee kind of thing, that okay, in the third term UCC will also be fulfilled. At the same time, the Modi is also talking, the BJP under Modi addresses each of these constituencies. It says something it treats every part of the population as some kind of vote bank, despite their kind of larger talk against vote bank politics. So when they say something about, okay, they have done something about women, they've done something about they kind of promise many things to the middle classes about this capex and infrastructure development, about the economic growth and all those things. Similarly, Modi keeps trying to kind of energize and provoke their Hindutva supporters to remain with the BJP despite all the other problems they may face. These are the core agendas which you should stick to the BJP again and campaign for us. So this is one. The second thing is what UCC, the opposition has always been clear that UCC opposition, all Congress and the left, if you're talking about the national forces, so they have always, in its intent, there's nothing wrong about uniform civil code. And there can be something, but how the BJP has actually used it historically is that by uniform, what they mean within their whole kind of imagination of a Hindu Rashtra, it's actually universalizing Hindu laws, and it has always been an kind of agenda for them to hit out against the Congress, who profess secularism. So if you are, so because their whole agenda is against Indian secularism, which itself is an original idea about coexistence. It's not the usual European secularism. It's a coexistence and diversity, and how we kind of stay together despite diversity. So it has, the BJP has always used uniform civil code to kind of attack that kind of idea of Indian secularism. And what exactly what this Uttarakhand government has done, they have tweaked only Muslim personal law while retaining all aspects of Hindu personal laws, which and which exactly means universalizing Hindu law. So they have, what uniform civil code, if implemented, should also have kind of some kind of social reformist kind of and a goal, which is completely absent there. So you don't have within the Hindu personal law, there's many discriminatory clauses regarding women's rights in women's inheritance or property rights in marriage. So those things have remained untouched, while they have taken away many progressive aspects of Muslim personal law. So the agenda of BJP's agenda is completely clear, that they want to completely, it's UCC is one part of their whole agenda to denigrate Muslims in India as second class citizens and universalize Hindu laws for everyone, so that India becomes a Hindu Rashtra. That's the motive that they go about, and UCC is part of that. So right now, why they are talking about, they want to begin that kind of discussion, so that again, this whole idea, all these kind of people's grievances around unemployment or poverty or people or lack of representation can be avoided, and people talk only about Ram Janmabhoomi or UCC. That is their agenda while going into this election.
That's very interesting,
Yeah.
because at the end of the 17 Lok Sabha, the parliament session was extended by a day to discuss the Ram Temple consecration ceremony. So if that in a sense sets the tone for what we are going to see in the coming days as we go into election season, only time will tell. Thank you so much, Yamini and Ajoy, for joining us on this discussion. We hope to have you again in the coming weeks, and thank you to our viewers for watching.